Okay, we are live now at Buddhist Insights and the Cloud. Hello, everyone. Nice to see you. So,
Okay. My name is Ajahn Wadebury Panyo, and as the Venerable said, we're at Empty Cloud Monastery. This is the regular Friday evening monk chat, which is an opportunity for you to write in questions, and also we'll take questions from our yogis who are here in the monastery as well, on any topic really related to Buddhism. So as I said, my name is Ajahn Wadebury Panyo. I'm visiting Empty Cloud Monastery, having arrived a couple of weeks ago. I remember being here last spring and greatly enjoying my visit here again. Such a wonderful community of monastics and lay people. And I'd like to ask Bhante to please take a moment and introduce yourself as well.
yes, Bhante. So, I'm Bhante Sanatapihari from Los Angeles, California. And you probably have seen me also in the past. I spent the Vasa here, and before that, from time to time, Aya and Bhante would invite me to give Dhamma talks here online too, Buddhist Insights. So I think most of you are familiar with me. Yes, as Bhante was saying, today we do monk chat, and we invite you to share your questions that you have about Dhamma or Dhamma related, and try to stay on topic, and we'll try to answer them to the best of our ability. Yes.
Please tell us a little bit about your ordination. So I understand you ordained in Sri Lanka, and when and which Nikaya, and a little bit about your background, ordination background.
Yes, Bhante. So I did my papaja. Papaja means the renouncing, which was a novice ceremony in North Hollywood, California at Sarachandra Buddhist Center, which is a Sri Lankan Theravada temple. I did it there under my teacher, who's the abbot, Bhante Ambalatota Kolita Nayakatera, under him, and the other deputy monks and Bangladeshi monks that were there. And then I spent 3 years as a samanera. One, I think the time was that long as the samanera. Most people don't spend that much time as a samanera, but one was because I was still in the inactive reserve component in the U.S. Air Force. So I was free from the Air Force, but in case like some crazy event happened, they could pull me back. So they had that for 2 years. So I had to wait for that to expire, because one of the questions when you become a bhikkhu is that, are you under the king's orders, which now would be the president or the government, right? So I had to wait for that to finish out, even though I wasn't technically in the military anymore, in case something happened. So then once that happened, then my teacher started setting everything in line for the ordination. And in Sri Lanka, for our Nikaya, the Amarapura Nikaya, Vajrayana, especially the one in Kandy, they only do the ordination once a year, the week before the Vasa begins. So then every monk, as soon as they ordain, they get one Vasa right away. It's like to make it quick. So then it took like almost a year, a few months, 8 months, for us to end up going to Sri Lanka for this ceremony in July. And it was really cool, Bhante, because like they brought all the monks from all over Sri Lanka, and there was all ranges from like monks who had just become 20 years old, and there was a monk who was in his 50s who ordained also. There were monks there who had been monks maybe like a year or two, and some monks who had been novice monks for about 10 years. So it was like a big different crowd, and they started ordaining one monk at a time since 6 a.m, and I was the second to last to be ordained, and I was ordained at midnight. Then that older monk who was I think in his 50s, he got ordained after me, and then we're done like around 1 a.m. So it was one by one, and there's like beautiful sima that no one's allowed to go in, only the monks, and everyone has to just look from the outside. So I was ordained there. It's called Maharagama Bhikkhu Training Center outside of Colombo. And that place was founded by Most Venerable Panyasiha, Lion's Roar. Lion's Wisdom, where you're going to be going. So that Lion's Wisdom is named after Venerable Panyasiha. So Panyasiha was also Dhamma brothers with, some of you may know this famous monk called Bhante Narada Thera, who wrote a lot of books. So they were Dhamma brothers. And our lineage goes back hundreds of years into Amarapura, which is in Myanmar. So it's a Myanmar lineage. So I got my novice ordination in 2015, and then my higher ordination in Sri Lanka in 2018. Yes.
Yes. Thank you. Oh, great story. Interesting story. I ordained in the lineage of Ajahn Chah at a monastery called Wat Mapchan, monastery of the Moonlit Mountain in Rayong Province, Thailand, back in 2014. And I think you ordained with 100 bhikkhus all in one day.
Yes.
It must have been an amazing experience. And, for me, it was me and one other bhikkhu, another Western monk. And so, not nearly as dramatic, but still a wonderful experience. Thank you for telling the story. It's very interesting. Okay, so it looks like we've got a number of people signing in online here.
Few greetings, like from Jerry, says good evening, and Chad doing Anjalis, Maria with Anjalis, and who else? Let's see. Manal and S. Geoff and Bhumika. And okay, I think here's a question now. Is it? Okay, here we go. Show. Oh, I remember how to do this. Okay, he asked. They asked. In the beginning of samsara cycle, gradual or a violent bang, does it begin with a person or a place? So samsara is not necessarily talking about like the universe, right? I mean, it's included within samsara, but we're not talking about necessarily about the physical universe. We're talking about the cycle of arising and ceasing of birth and death. That's what really I feel like samsara is trying to focus on, right? This kind of process that we're going conditioned by ignorance, not really talking about like planets and suns and things like that. I don't think that's the emphasis, although it's included within it.
Right. Yes, it's all included. The four great elements, of matter and energy, and is all included in it. But really, the Buddha had us focus on this process of birth and death we go through, and it says in the suttas that if you look back, a beginning point can't be found.
Mm-hmm.
Right. This is what it says in the suttas, that the Buddha himself tried. And as I recall, he said it was, he looked back 91 incalculable eons. This is, if I recall the number correctly, yeah. And apparently that's the limit. That's the limit that anyone could ever look back. Sammasambuddha can look back that far. And nobody can look back any further. And even looking back that far, you couldn't find a beginning. This is a tremendous amount of time, trillions upon trillions of years. Somebody once did a calculation from a metaphor in the suttas. It had something to do with if you had a huge, like a reservoir or a tank. It was something like 10 miles wide by 10 miles long by 10 miles deep, something along these lines. Someone came around every 100 years and dropped a mustard seed into it, a tiny, tiny little seed. And did this every 100 years. Then by the time that huge empty tank were full, it would be one incalculable eon. But actually, an incalculable eon would be even longer. The Buddha says, and according to the suttas, I'm sure I've got the metaphor a little bit wrong. I don't remember it exactly, but it's something along those lines. Some vast amount of time. And the Buddha says he looked back 91 of those, and those time frames, and still couldn't find a beginning. So the Buddha would redirect his disciples on questions like this. There's a question in the suttas. If I recall correctly, one of the speculative questions is the universe finite or infinite? Mm-hmm. Okay. Which, as Bhante Sanatavihari pointed out, isn't necessarily the same as samsara, but it's a very similar kind of question. Is the universe finite or infinite? And the Buddha says that he doesn't say it's finite, he doesn't say it's infinite. Actually, he doesn't take a position on a question like this, but he redirects our experience, or our attention rather, to our experience of suffering, and how to reduce our suffering, how to end our suffering. So this is something that we can work with right here in the present, and it's something that's really relevant to us. So he tried to always direct his disciples back to that kind of a question.
But when you explain it like that, it reminds me of the simile of the arrow. The person shot with the arrow, and then it's like, okay, would you want the arrow to be taken out, or would you wait to know the name, the clan, the clothing, the arrow, the feather on the arrow, the bow, the string on the bow? Would you want to know all those things, or do you want to get to the real matter of the issue, which is the suffering that you're experiencing now? Or are you going to wait until someone tells you like how the galaxy came about, how many galaxies there are in the universe, how long the universe has been around? Has there been other universes? Is there other dimensions? Like, what? Why? Like, you're suffering now. Let's get rid of the arrow. Let's stop suffering and leave those questions to the side.
Sadhu.
Okay, so we also have some greetings from Kim and some sadhus from Arjo, and also Anjalis from Ishim, and I believe that's Burmese, some Anjalis. Right? That's Burmese, I think. Yeah.
Oh, yes, Burmese script, right.
Yes. So we're getting some love from Myanmar. Mary says hello. Sud also Anjali. Rick says Meta from Indiana. Okay, I think this might be a question here. It says, if suffering is long drawn, extended period of time, is there any advice you would give to help cultivate equanimity through this period?
I once asked a question like this of a meditation master, a monk, years ago. He'd had some trouble getting ordained, actually. When he was a young man, he had to travel from. He ran into many obstacles along the way to getting ordained, and he had to travel and this kind of thing. And I asked him a question very much like this, and he says, "Well, sure. When you're having a lot of suffering and you're going through a lot of difficulties, what you can do is you can reflect that at least you're not dead." And I thought at the time, well, it's a really interesting answer to the question. I never would have thought of it that way, and actually it didn't sound so hopeful. It didn't sound very optimistic. I thought it was kind of a morbid way of looking at it. But then actually I found myself from time to time, I actually did use that advice. And I thought, actually we have the suffering right now in the present, But actually, if we look at it, we also have, there are many good things in our life, including that we're still alive. We have the opportunity to do good things. We have the opportunity to follow the Buddhist teachings, and to appreciate the good things that we do have in life. That's one way to cultivate equanimity. You look at the positive aspects of the situation. If you have any advice also about that.
But I'm reminded of, it's a book about Ajahn Chah, and I don't know who's the teacher, if it's Ajahn Chah or someone else in the story, but there was this young monk who had to sweep the leaves every morning. And he was get so frustrated because it would just be all full of leaves and it would take him so long. So he was just like, this is too much dukkha, like too much suffering, cleaning up all these leaves. So one day, I think he went to Ajahn Chah or one of the teachers there. And he told them, I'm just tired with all these leaves. It's too much. I can't sweep all the leaves. Too many leaves. I can't sweep them all. And then I think Ajahn Chah, one of the teachers, says, no. You don't have to sweep them all. Just the one in front of you.
Aha. Sadhu,
right. So as he goes along, just focus on the leaves that are in front of you. Don't focus on all that big suffering, incalculable kalpas of suffering, of samsara. That's too much. That's too big of a burden. Just what's happening right now. Deal with the dukkha in this very moment and don't start thinking about the future.
Sadhu. Yes, right. Because you might be thinking about, boy, this is going to last a long time. Or you may be thinking about how much you've already had to go through. And if you can put down both the past and the future, and just focus on what you have right here. Bring your mindfulness right to what is right here in the present, and actually everything will feel a lot lighter. We have a tendency to carry around with us the past, and then to project into the future and start picking that up too. And then it feels like we have the whole world on our shoulders. And if we just focus on what's right here, yeah, that's great.
Okay, thank you for the question, Ashish. Then we have another question here from Chad. The Buddha seems to have given so many meditation instructions. Which kind of meditation from the suttas do you think is unappreciated or unemphasized?
Well, let's see. There's a set of meditations that I think are underutilized in the West that I think would be very beneficial. And those are, so it's not just one, but a set of them, the 6 inspiring themes. And they're the recollection of the Buddha, the recollection of the Dhamma, and the recollection of the Sangha. And recollection of our sacrifices or generosity. That's the 4th. The 5th is recollection of our self-control with regard to moral issues, especially. And the 6th is the recollection of the devas. So recollection of the angels, for example, and the fact that we have within us the same potential to be reborn as Day was in the heavenly realms. These are the 6 inspiring themes. I think perhaps one that's the easiest to get started with for most Westerners anyway might be the recollection of our generosity and sacrifices, our good deeds in this way, acts of service also, the 4th one that I mentioned. And perhaps also the recollection of our own self-control, especially with regard to moral issues, reflecting, in a world where there are many people who kill, even kill other people. You can recollect, well, do I keep the precept of not killing? And this can bring up very, very positive kinds of feelings. Think about our own principles, and think about how keeping these is special and it's beneficial. So those are 2: the recollection of generosity and the recollection of our self-control with regard to moral issues. I think they're perhaps especially easy for Westerners to get started with.
Bhante, I was also going to say the same thing.
Oh.
I was going to say the anusatis, like Buddha Nusati, Metta Nusati, Mara Nusati, right? Asubha Nusati, you have Dhamma Nusati, Sangha Nusati. Anusati means to bring your attention, Anusati, bring attention back. So recollecting these themes. But actually, my Samanera training consisted of practicing these Chaturaraka, these 4 recollections that a monk should contemplate every day. We would chant it 3 times a day: Buddha, Metta, Asubha, and death. Chanting. So I think the reflections, right? And it's very popular, actually, as Bhante was kind of alluding to indirectly. In Asia, most Buddhists practice these. This is like the main meditation, to reflect on the Dhamma, to reflect on the Buddha. You might have heard about it in Japanese called Nembutsu. Nembutsu means to think about the Buddha all the time. Butsu is the Buddha. Nembutsu, recollecting the Buddha. You find it in Pure Land a lot, right? Namo Amitabha, like thinking about the Buddha. So it's kind of more of a devotional practice, but it's actually just reflecting on what is good. We're keeping in mind what is good. The Buddha is like the highest level of goodness, right? So we're thinking about the ideal, and that we get inspiration, our mind transforms. We don't have any greed, hatred, and delusion when we're thinking about the Buddha, the Dhamma, or the Sangha. Our mind inclines towards the practice of Dhamma. So this is one of kind of the more practices that's kind of neglected in maybe Western Buddhist circles, especially ones that are more focused on like on insight or sutta study, these kind of other practices that you find in Asia, which most people are doing. 99% of Buddhists over there are kind of not as popular or emphasized. Let's see. So we have some Anjalis from Sa Min O, and then another question over here from our friend Sud. Sud says, Dear Bhante, do you think one can work during the Uposatha days, or is it recommended by the Buddha to be off work for lay people during Uposatha?
Great question. As Sud came into the monastery recently, and we were talking a little bit about the Uposatha day, and it's interesting. I think actually in the suttas where the Buddha was talking about the Uposatha day, I don't remember him discussing whether the person observing the day would be working or not. It was my sense from the suttas that the idea was to focus on spiritual practice for those days. And I think that if you try it either way, try it on a day when you're working on the job, or if you try it on a day when you have the day free to focus on spiritual practice, that you can see what works for you. But obviously, if you're free to focus on the spiritual practice, you'll get more spiritual benefit out of it, probably. And the Uposatha day, it's practicing the precepts. And then you have the opportunity to meditate quite a bit as well. And oftentimes, people observing the Uposatha day will go into a monastery or meditation center, so they're in an environment that's really conducive to practice and focused on practice, so we don't get distracted into other things. Yeah, maybe that's good. I wonder if you have any thoughts.
That's fine, Bhante. That's good. And then our friend Sud has another question. It says, Dear Bhante, can one develop concentration by meditating on 6 inspiring themes to the level of jhana?
Okay. Good question. Let's see. I think that the commentaries have a breakdown of this for each one, the level of concentration you can reach. And I don't remember what they all are. And I think there's sometimes maybe a little bit of controversy about them as well. And but it says in the suttas, there's one section of the suttas, the Samyutta Nikaya, where the Buddha is talking to a group of monks, and he says when you're feeling restless, or if you're feeling lethargic, so two kind of extreme, two opposites really. If you're feeling either restless or if you're feeling lethargic when you're trying to meditate, you can practice the inspiring themes. The Theravada tradition understands that as being those 6 meditation objects I was talking about. And the Buddha says, and you practice the inspiring themes until you feel piti, you feel rapture, and then you move into meditation in the Satipatthana, the 4 foundations of mindfulness. So maybe breath meditation, for example. So I think that's an indication from the suttas there about that you can reach a pretty good state of concentration that way. Yeah, I'll put it that way.
And also like the Asubha and Mara we find within the Satipatthana Sutta itself too. Those reflections are there. So, I mean, that's a good indication, right? If it doesn't get you straight into jhana, right, maybe just a threshold of it, right? It's part of you can use it as part of the practice.
Right.
Okay. So then we have a question from our friend Rick, who says, Bhantes, what are skillful ways we can practice to get rid of delusion when we don't have a local teacher or Sangha to guide us?
Okay. Well, so that's a great question, Rick. Let's see. What you want to do, I think, is focus on some of the fundamentals first. Make sure you have the fundamentals in place, like following the 5 precepts, and having a practice of generosity. These are supports for the mind and for meditation practice. And meditation practice feeds back into these. And I allude to meditation practice because you're asking about delusion, and you want to go get into some meditation practice if you want to free the mind of delusion. And one meditation practice that is suitable for all personality types is breath meditation. In fact, they say that it's the type of meditation the Buddha was practicing when he attained enlightenment. And it's a relatively straightforward practice. I think is one of the things that's nice about it. If you simply practice finding a quiet place when you're going to practice formal meditation, if possible, a relatively quiet place where you can kind of focus on meditation, not be distracted by too many of the things, and just be aware of the natural in and out breath. And you don't have to do anything special with it, and you don't have to think anything special or anything like this. But just try to, in a relaxed way, be aware of the breath coming in and out in the present moment. And when any distractions arise, such as thoughts or sounds or feelings in the body, if you can be aware of them, that is, you have to have enough alertness to recognize that you've been distracted by something, and then become aware of what it is you're distracted by. And then you can simply kind of name it to help you with the awareness of it. For example, thinking, just silently thinking this to yourself, or feeling, or hearing, to become aware of it and to kind of focus your attention on that, and then let it go and come back to the breath. And if you practice this over time, it's a very simple meditation method, very straightforward, but very effective for helping to overcome delusion, because you're practicing awareness right in the present moment like that. These are some ideas. I wonder if you have anything to add.
That's a good one. Then Rick has another question. Rick is asking, Bhantes, how do I get free of the aversion I feel with how awful females are treated by some religious spiritual communities?
Well, so yes, it's a great question, and I think this is something it touches on problems that many of us see and think about in regard to many people. We might feel upset about how females are treated in some religious communities. We might feel upset about how people of different ethnicities are treated in various communities. We might feel upset about people who are oppressed or repressed in various ways. People who are victims of violence might feel upset about animals who are mistreated, and it's one thing is we want to not let the try to have some to be able to step back a little bit and to activate some mindfulness and to kind of develop some reserve, not get caught up in thinking and in the information about it, sort of thing. This is one tack you can take. So, for example, I was just talking about breath meditation, and this is actually relevant in this kind of practice. If we have a practice of generosity and keeping precepts, helps us to be calm and helps us to let go. And if we practice a formal meditation from time to time with sitting in a quiet place and just objectively being aware in the present moment of the breath, this helps us to let go some more as well, and to not get caught up in things. So overall, developing an attitude and an appreciation of calm, recognizing that when we feel anger, for example, that this kind of it messes up how we see things. It makes it so we don't see things as clearly as we could, and it also can mess up our judgment a little bit about how to react to things. It isn't that we need to say that what's happening is okay, or that we agree with it, but we want to be able to approach life from a place of calm and wisdom. And so if we reflect a little bit on the aversion we feel in various situations, and realize that when I'm feeling aversion, it's suffering for me, and it may cause me to do something that I'll later regret. If I want to help solve a problem, for example, like how women are treated in some religious communities, then in order to interact with the situation effectively, it's better for me to be kind of clear inside and to be calm, and then I can be much more skillful. So those are some reflections we can use. There's probably a lot more that could be said on it. So I'd like to invite Bhante.
No, I think I'm just going to piggyback off what Bhante was saying about focusing more on the aversion and not the object of aversion, because the object can always change, right? It can be upset about, as Bhante was saying, treatment of women in religious communities. It can be the treatment of ethnicities within Southern communities. So if we just focus on one particular object, then there's countless objects that could still cause aversion. So if we focus instead on aversion itself and not the object of aversion, we can deal with the root of the problem, as Bhante was trying to say, right? And we do that by practicing calmness, by practicing non-reactivity, practicing equanimity, practicing restraint in senses, right? Not being pulled in, not being caught up by the thoughts, these thought trains that go on, and not also feeling justified in our anger. Also recognizing that we're the first person that gets hurt from our anger, right? And actually anger, as Bhante was saying, doesn't solve the problem, right? It's not really doing anything. If anything, it's kind of clouding your judgment. So then we want to work with the anger itself, the aversion itself at the very subtle level. It's just a kind of like unpleasant feeling. And then you want to react to it. You want to do something about this unpleasant feeling. And for me, it was very uncomfortable. I was such a stiff and non-flexible person when I first started sitting on the cushion. So I learned to work with that aversion from just being very, very uncomfortable and in pain and in cold sweat while I was sitting. And I learned to practice how to manage that emotion with equanimity and calmness and self-compassion, right? And then from what I learned from working with that very subtle aversion of the slight pain in the body, then I was able to translate that into like other things in my life that caused aversion, right? So then we can use our time on the cushion to develop our ability to be with aversion, right? So stop fidgeting when you're sitting, right? Stop touching things, stop scratching yourself, Stop adjusting your legs, be with the aversion there, because you're in a safe place. This is something that you can manage for 20, 30 minutes. You can manage this aversion you have to these unpleasant feelings during meditation. And the better you get with that, that's going to translate over into and spill over into being able to deal with aversion in other spaces. So let's start with something very easy, like being uncomfortable on the cushion. We don't want to start off with something very difficult like this world issue about women being treated in a bad way by religious group. That's such a big thing. Like, it's overwhelming, right? We feel like we fall into this state of like empathic distress, and it's too much for us to think about all the suffering that's going on. So we kind of want to build ourselves up to that level where we can hold that by working with something very small and the root of the problem, instead of some of the symptoms that are caused by this state of aversion. Okay, so now we have another question from our friend Wise Men Say. Dear Venerables, how does one go about not mirroring the emotional state of other people? If someone is more anxious, when I talk to them, I become more anxious.
Great question. Yes, right.
Bante, I'd just like to say that, mirroring is something that humans do naturally. That's part of being empathic. Having the ability to empathize is to mirror other people. So this quality is actually quality that we can leverage to our advantage, but it's like a double-edged sword, right? If we don't know how to wield empathy, if we don't know how to wield this, beautiful capacity we have in these mirror neurons, then it could work against us, just like any other thing that we have, right? Our strength, our speed, our intelligence. We can be able to use it skillfully and wield it in a skillful way, or be able to wield it in an unskillful way. And one way is just by learning about, what actually is going on in our mind, in our brain, in our body when we're mirroring, the processes that cause this to happen. So we begin to understand this process. Another way to go about it is to think about the results and consequences from when we mirror other people's actions. So when we're mirroring other people's actions, is it for their benefit? Is it for our benefit? Is it for the benefit of all? Right? We look at the results and then we intervene, right? Or we act in the best way. And sometimes that might go against our natural intuition to mirror certain things, because sometimes the person doesn't want you to reciprocate in the way that they're behaving. Imagine someone who's like very distraught and they come to you, right? They want to lean on you. They come for your support, and then they share with you and you become distraught too. Like, that's not what they were there for. They were there for you to support. They came to you for that support, right? So we need to think, this is not about me. This is about this other person. And although I feel these feelings, right now, I have to kind of like put them aside for the moment to serve this person in the best way, right? And then you don't deny those feelings. Then you find someone else who can support you, right, in the same way. So sometimes we have to think about what's in the best interest of others. And for the moment, we kind of put these things aside to be able to serve and act properly in those situations. So I just want to remind you that this is like something that everyone does to some degree. That's why people, when you yawn, someone else yawns, right? When someone tells you something sad, our face becomes sad, right? When your friend comes and says, "Oh, I'm upset at this person," you kind of also get a little upset. It's a natural thing that we do. Even dogs, to some extent, and other animals do it. They learn this, especially ones that interact with humans. So it's just a natural capacity that we have. We just we have to know how to wield it properly and skillfully, and that comes through like education and practice, and also thinking about the intention. What's your intention in this life? My intention is to be a benefit, to help others, to reciprocate in a beneficial way, and then recall that intention that you have all the time when you're having these interactions, and then also take care of yourself, right? Take care of yourself. Whatever emotions come up that are difficult, like anxiety, then you can also lean on someone else.
So wonderful suggestions. I'd like to add some other things kind of from a different kind of angle, which is kind of the fundamental spiritual practices you might have in life that help you over time to develop the capacity to do these kinds of things also, to strengthen you in these ways. I was talking before, answering Rick's question about having a practice of generosity and keeping precepts, principles, moral principles that are important to you. Because these will, over time, they'll strengthen your mind internally. so that you become stronger and can kind of be more in control of what kinds of emotional states you feel. So the meditation practice also, I don't know if you have a regular meditation practice, but a meditation practice like the breath meditation I was talking about before earlier with Rick, it will help you to become more mindful in the present. And so, for example, if you find yourself interacting with someone who's very anxious, then you'll naturally become more aware over time in these kinds of situations of how your own emotions are going, and also be able to have more power to interact with them internally, with your own emotions, your own anxiety that might be arising, so that you'll be able to stay calmer through your growing practice of mindfulness. Yeah, so these are kind of more kind of like fundamental ongoing practices that will feed through into the very specific kinds of things that Bhante was talking about as well.
Okay, so now we have another question from our friend Rick, and says, Venerables, can you talk about how to create a supportive Sangha?
So you're asking before about how do you practice without a teacher. Now you're asking about how to create a supportive Sangha. And yes, it's a common question these days with so many people interested in Buddhism, and people finding themselves in areas where there may not be a meditation group or a monastery nearby, and I see we had someone in the monastery here just recently spent some time, and I think they use some kind of an online app or service. I can't remember what it was called, to find out if other people in the area who had an interest in meditation. And I wonder, does anyone know the names of these kinds of things? I think maybe something was called like Meetup or something.
Oh yeah, Meetup. Yes.
Meetup, okay.
Mm-hmm.
I've been in Thailand for 10 years in a shack in the jungle, so I don't know what these things are. So, but she's So it's sort of like you could go on and find out who in this area has an interest in this kind of thing, and she found that there were a couple of other people in her area who wanted to get together and meditate regularly, and they each had so she and these other two people, they wanted to meditate. They came from substantially different backgrounds within Buddhism. So I don't know if I remember accurately what they were. One of them was interested in the Thai forest tradition and had been reading Thai forest tradition stuff, and another person had been studying Thich Nhat Hanh and practicing Thich Nhat Hanh's style of meditation, and somebody else yet another style. I don't remember what it was. And so one of the key things to come together sounded like it would be some flexibility, and some a willingness to say, what do we have in common, and if we practice, sitting meditation together, we can sit harmoniously, and just having other people meditate with will help us in our practice, even though we may come from different kinds of backgrounds. Something else is you might see if there is an established Sangha already that knows of people in your area. I don't know where you are, Rick, but some established Sanghas, such as like Abhayagiri Monastery out in California, had a program for a number of years. I don't know if it's still going on, but it was called the Community of Abhayagiri Lay Ministers, or CALM as an acronym. And so every year, I think it was every other year, they would have a program for training lay ministers who were from many different places, not just near where Abhayagiri Monastery was out in California. And they kept information, basically like a database of where these lay ministers were, and so they could offer referrals, as I recall. And so you can find perhaps established Sanghas not too far away from you and see if they have any kinds of programs like this, or if they have any additional information about resources you might have that you're not aware of in your own area. Something else I thought of. I wonder if you have any ideas, Bhante.
Yeah, Bhante. Sometimes when we come into a group or an organization, we're thinking like, how could this group organization support me? We're going there to like get something or receive something, right? But how about we think about it the other way? Like, what can I add? right? So instead of thinking like, what can I do for this Sangha to better support me? Like, no, what can I do to support the Sangha? Right? What can I do to help the community? What can I give? What can I contribute? And I think sometimes if we think about it that way, whatever our initial intention was will kind of work out at the end. So I especially sorry, but a lot of Westerners, they come with this attitude, like of like to these places, like, oh, this is for me. Like, give me meditation, give me this, give me teachings, right? I want a good teacher. I want a nice temple. I want the nice cushion. Like, it's all about the problem that Buddhism is telling you, which is me, myself, and I, right? So instead of going in with that attitude, you have to go in like, oh, here's a beautiful community. How can I help them? And by doing that, you're going to get everything that you want anyways, So just let's see, instead of thinking about like, creating communities, how can I support communities, right? So it's just kind of like a little pivot. And I found this very useful. And it's something that a lot of Sanghas are actually talking about here in the West now to kind of focus on that. So it's not like my original thing that I came up with. And also when you go to Asia, like this is the way just people do. Like people are related to the monks, people are related to the temple, the temples are in the village. So people are just mutually supporting each other. There isn't this kind of like, what is the temple doing for me? There isn't that kind of thinking, or what can I create? How can I make something? Or all of that I, me, myself, and my is kind of put to the side. So this is, maybe this is not what you were talking about, but I find this a very supportive perspective that we can take that can help us with many of these issues when we talk about Sangha, right? I think this kind of view about Sangha and how Buddhism is shared in the West can really help us kind of deal with some of these gaps that we might not finding solution for in the way that we kind of usually approach these problems. Okay, so we have another question from our friend Andrew. Andrew says, Dear Bhantes, of the many meditation subjects taught by the Buddha and enumerated in the commentaries, how do you decide what subject to choose on any given formal meditation session?
That's a great question, and we may have kind of unwittingly, I think maybe because we talked about so many meditation methods already just in this one monk chat. So it's funny. We're so fortunate in the Buddhist teachings to have such a wealth of different meditation teachings, as well as so many other teachings as well. But then actually, there are so many meditation teachings, sometimes it can get confusing. And so, I think I was talking about 6 meditation methods earlier, the 6 inspiring themes. And I was talking about breath meditation as well. I also oftentimes talk about love and kindness meditation. And then sometimes I'll talk about meditation on the repulsive aspects of the body and all these different kinds of meditation methods. And it can get confusing. And so I think that it can be good to have kind of a mainstay practice when you're practicing formal meditation. That you have one kind of practice you typically do, and then sometimes maybe you add or complement with something else, and so you're not always thinking about which meditation practice should I do now, and it's good to have one kind of mainstay so that you can learn and develop with that one meditation style. Ajahn Chah had a teaching. He said it's kind of like digging a well. If you're trying to dig down and find water, you have to keep digging in the same spot until you hit the water. If you dig a little bit here and then dig a little bit there and then dig a little bit in another place, then you'll never get any water. You'll die of thirst. But then on the other hand, he had another teaching. He was telling some other disciples at another time. He says, meditation is kind of like eating. If you eat the same food every single day, every time, then eventually you'll just get tired of it, tired of that food. And so it is helpful sometimes to have something else to complement your meditation practice with. So I was talking earlier about breath meditation, and that's one that's suitable, as I said, for all personality types. And it's so simple and straightforward that it helps with developing kind of calm and stillness of mind. And you don't have to really believe in anything. It's just simply believing in knowing, feeling like that if you practice mindfulness in the present moment, just with this very simple thing like breath meditation, that's you're developing something good, this faculty of knowing. And then sometimes you might practice something like recollection of generosity, as I was talking about earlier, or maybe loving kindness, something like that. That's my recommendation.
That's good. We talked a lot about different meditations already, so I think we're good. Okay. Amit says, "Good evening, Bhante. I tend to get lazy or burned out from overextending my effort. I'm having trouble finding balance in meditation. How do I find the right balance?" I think this is tricky, right? Because everyone has like different thresholds.
Yeah.
Like what's spicy to me may not be spicy to you, or maybe so. Like balance is different for each person, right? For monks, balance looks way different than from someone who has a family and has a bunch of kids. Like their work-life balance is very different from the monastic one, right? So first, like what I'm trying to say is like, don't look at others, have no expectations, right? You kind of have to customize your practice to where you're at in your life, right? It has to be a realistic based practice, like something that you could actually maintain. So I think that's the first thing. We need to come into this practice with realistic expectations and realistic practices, and understanding that we can only practice to the extent that, the conditions allow us in this very moment. And I know we might have a lot of vigor, right, or passion for the Dhamma, but too much of anything can be hurtful. The Buddha said even the Dhamma has to be treated like a snake, right? Don't grab it from the tail, grab it from the head, because the Dhamma can turn around and bite you if you don't properly wield it. And talking about earlier also about how skillfully using things and not skillfully using things. So first, I think we need to kind of like really be honest with ourselves. And we may not be where we're at, where we want to be in our life, and that's okay. Things can change, right? Anicca, all things change. And then base your practice on your current situations, knowing that your situations can change. And then later, when those situations change, maybe you can put more effort in, dedicate more time, right? Do more things. But I don't think it does us any good to overextend ourselves and, and then fall into this kind of like self-criticism, or maybe, oh, woe is me. That doesn't help the practice. So let's just avoid that by like setting really, really pragmatic expectations and practicing in a very pragmatic way. And you can always change it later.
Right. You can also kind of develop some kind of objective measures for yourself in relation to how you're feeling. You mentioned things like feeling lazy on the one hand or getting burned out. And you can pay attention to in your development of mindfulness. Well, how am I feeling internally? Am I starting to get, you say burned out? Are you starting to get grumpy? Are you starting to get frustrated? Are you starting to get tense? And these kinds of things. You can look internally, like, am I in terms of laziness? Do I actually have energy? But I just don't feel like meditating. I just don't feel like I have much motivation, And so you want to use your mindfulness and your wisdom, your mindfulness and your discernment to pay attention to how do you feel inside, and work out. Am I tired? Am I exhausted? Or am I just unmotivated? And then on the other hand, have I really been pushing myself too hard in meditation? You can develop some objective measures, about how you're doing, how your mindfulness is going. For example, it reminds me of a time when monastery I was staying at, the monks were being encouraged to do the all-night meditation vigils, even multiple nights in a row. And I remember with one new monk, we were talking about something we had to do, some work we had to do, and he couldn't follow the conversation. He and I were talking about it, and he couldn't follow the conversation at all. And it suddenly clicked in my head. He's been practicing all-night meditation vigils for a few nights now, and I think he's just overtired. And I actually asked him really quick a math question. I asked him, what's this times this, or something like that, And he was stumped for a minute, and you could see that he could also tell, like, actually, I should know this. I should be able to figure this out, but he couldn't work it out. It took him, twice or three times as long as it should be to work it out in his head. But he came up with the answer. I think it kind of clicked for him as well. Wait a minute, at this point, I need to get some rest. because I'm not getting he wasn't developing clarity, clarity and insight and mindfulness. He was getting dull at that point. And so you can do this kind of thing. Pay attention with your own mindfulness to how you're doing internally, and then make objective judgments this way, which you'll get better and better at over time as you develop more mindfulness and wisdom.
Okay, here's a question from Sergio. Bantes, are there any teachings from Mahayana or Vajrayana that you found helpful in your understanding and or practice?
Let's see. Let's see. From I found the examples of the bodhisattvas. Some of the bodhisattvas very inspiring. That I can say. I ordained in Thailand, which is ostensibly a Theravadan country, but there is a substantial amount of worship and admiration of some of the great bodhisattvas that are typically associated with Mahayana Buddhism. So, for example, if you go to Thailand, you'll see there are many statues of Guan Yin. In Thailand, she's called the Jiao Man Kuan Im. Jiao Man meaning the Lord Mother, Guan Yin meaning the one who hears the cries of the world. And she is known for being foremost her foremost quality being compassion. And so thinking of her and this idea of compassion and how she embodies it and so on, I found very inspiring over time. Thinking of Ksitigarbha, the earth store bodhisattva, who they say is walks in hell as we speak, not as a hell being, but as someone who is liberating other beings from hell. With unmitigated optimism and joyful effort, on a long quest to free all the beings in hell from hell. I found this also to be a very inspiring teaching. Like, wow. Sometimes when I think I've got big jobs ahead of me, or I think life is daunting, I think about what an example that is, how much effort he must have to put in and the long view he must take, and how patient he has to be. We were talking about this recently in the monastery. His practice, as it's been described, how he actually liberates beings from hell. So being very specific, that he'll find a being in hell who has some good karma in the past. And he can ascertain whether or not they have the ability to remember this good karma. And so he'll approach this being and using his loving kindness, help them to become calm, sharing his loving kindness with them. And then he'll tell them, you've done this good deed in the past and you have the ability to remember it. Try to think back to it and remember it. And then the being remembering it, because of the good karma of remembering a past good deed, and the happiness that comes from remembering the past good deed, may be reborn right then and there in a higher realm, and thereby released from hell. And I thought this was quite an inspiring idea, and it reminded me, talking about earlier about the nusitis, the recollections, for example, of our own good deeds and so on. And if we practice this when we're meditating, thinking back to our own good deeds and how much it can lift the mind and make us happier. I found the example of Ksitigarbha, this story, very inspiring in that way. So those are some teachings that came up.
I was going to say the same thing, so similar. All right. Next one, we have Miguel. Bante, someone produces veterinary vaccines. The vaccinated animals belong to farmers or large companies and will be eventually sold and sacrificed to be used as food for humans. Animals will have a healthier life thanks to the vaccines, but if the person who makes the vaccines breaking the sila, are they accumulating bad karma when cooperating with these industries. Thank you for your response. Bante, do you remember that story about the wife of a hunter? So there's this hunter, and he goes out every day, to hunt, and he kills many animals. And it's supposedly his wife was a Buddhist, and she would, prepare everything for him to go to work and get everything ready. And when he would bring the animal, she would prepare it and cook it for him. And she felt really bad. So then she asked, I get some Arhat or the Buddha, am I guilty for, helping my husband with all the things he needs to get done so he can go hunt? And the answer was no. Actually, you have no intention of killing, right? You're doing your duties as a wife, supporting your husband. You don't want the animals to be killed, right? You don't have the intention. You don't rejoice in it. None of these things. So basically, you're blameless. So you shouldn't worry about it. I think it's in the Dhammapada. I'm trying to remember where that story is at.
Maybe the Dhammapada commentary, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. I have heard that before. I've forgotten it. Yeah, it's a good story. And I think it's that's a very good story to bring to mind. And the principle, what is your intention? And what are your intentional actions in the situation? And I wonder if we could scroll up and look at the first half of the question. Yes. I'm trying to focus in on you mentioned the cooperation. The vaccinated animals belong to farmers or large companies and will be eventually sold and sacrificed to be used as food for humans. The animals will have a healthier life thanks to the vaccines, but they're breaking their precepts, their sila, by cooperating with these companies. So it looks like the makers of the vaccines, it says that the animals are already owned by the farmers or the large companies, and the makers of the vaccines are simply providing the vaccines for them.
Or the veterinarian who's giving the animals the vaccines, since they're keeping the animals healthy, and the animals eventually will be slaughtered.
Right. So it doesn't look like the producers of the veterinary vaccines are actually doing anything related to harming the animals or killing them, as far as I can see. So so it looks like no. As far as I can tell from the way the question's asked, it doesn't look like it doesn't look like they're doing anything wrong.
Yeah, because then if we would apply if we would say that's wrong, then we'd have to apply the logic. The people who are providing the food for the cows that are going to be slaughtered are also guilty, right? And the people who provide electricity for the farm are also guilty, and the people who provide water for the, then basically everyone, right? Everyone is guilty.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you for the question, and a lot of thank yous and other things.
Wow.
Let's put it. It's funny. I find it funny. All right, Maria. When we hear that modern monastics attained enlightenment, what are those claims based on? People saying it, right? That's really, at the end of the day, that's what they're based on. People saying it, because the monastic themselves would never say it. It's an offense.
Well,
to a layperson.
To a layperson, right. So, some monastics may tell their disciples, for example, their other monastic disciples. Mm-hmm. Some monastics may tell lay people, but in the code of conduct for monks, I assume it's also the same for bhikkhunis, that is for female monks, that it forbids the monastic to tell a layperson that they have attained enlightenment, or that they practice jhana, for example. These kinds of talking about their own practice, about having reached different levels of attainment in the practice, relatively high levels of attainment in the practice, is forbidden, actually. Although some may do it, it has happened. But some may they can tell their monastic disciples. You can even be very straightforward about it. And sometimes it isn't that they've done this, but some of their monastic disciples may have, or their lay disciples may have come to their own conclusions that the monastic is enlightened. Then they may spread it around, and sometimes this may be pretty well founded. Sometimes it may not be. I guess there's an old saying that disciples make their teachers fly, meaning that the teachers actually can't fly, but the way the disciples talk about them, it seems like they're making them fly. And so, yeah. For ourselves, I think where this question comes from is oftentimes we want, or usually we want a teacher who really knows what they're talking about, or it might be that we want a teacher who knows what they're talking about, and could we find someone who's enlightened to learn from, or if we want to make merit, we want to make offerings and gifts to someone who's enlightened, for example, thinking this will be a lot of merit, But it can be very hard to tell. Even if you live closely with someone who you think may be enlightened, even for a long time, it can be really hard to come to the conclusion that they're definitely enlightened or not. Partly because even enlightened beings each have their own personalities, and even enlightened beings can be, in a way, kind of surprising in their behavior. You might say sometimes seemingly imperfect. If we put it that way loosely, like we might think, boy, I never would have expected someone who's enlightened to act that way. But then you may find over time, well, actually, this person, they may not seem perfect in every way, but they really may seem like they're free of selfish desires, for example, or free of aversion, these kinds of things. And so our own opinions may change over time, and it may be a learning process for us. But it says in the suttas that it takes a long time to get to know somebody. And if we're trying to see, who should we learn from, for example, you want to discern who to learn from based on their one way, because there are different kinds of ways discussed in the sutras. One way is to look at two things: their morality, kind of like do they keep good ethics. And another aspect is do the teachings they give, if I put them into practice, do they actually work? So if you put something into practice, and after contemplating it, hearing a teaching, if you contemplate it, it seems like a good thing to try. If you try it out and give it an honest try, you may have to clarify with the teacher a bit. If you find over time that it gets the kind of results that you're looking for, then that's a teaching to keep. And you may not from this be able to determine whether or not this person is enlightened, but you can grow in Dhamma, and that's really one of the key things. And so I think maybe that's where we want to direct our attention more, is to these kinds of cause and effect relationships and how we ourselves can grow, and whether or not we'll actually attain enlightenment in the long run.
Scott Bartel, Venerables, have you helped anyone with trauma? How?
I never have never have extensively. I've known people who were in situations where their traumatic memories were triggered, and they started kind of re-experiencing the trauma, and so simply trying to be understanding, and listening, and I myself found myself not trying to give much advice or anything like that, but kind of listening and giving them space and allowing them the opportunity to work through what they were going through, this kind of thing. So using flexibility and patience, on my own part, and recognizing that I didn't really understand completely what they were going through, but trying to be sympathetic and compassionate, this kind of thing. That's really all I can offer on that subject, I guess.
Yes, Bhante. I've actually worked with many people on trauma. Somehow they ended up finding me. And as Bante said, actually, that is the core of everything that I've been doing the last couple of years, working with people with trauma. Just providing a safe space, holding the space, bearing witness to their suffering, right? Letting them express themselves, and providing a relationship where they don't feel like they're being judged, right? Or that you're going to tell someone else, right? That you can keep everything confident. So just holding that space. I have deep trust in people's own intelligence and their own ability to heal. So just giving them that opportunity, that place where they can do the healing, because maybe other places there is just too much. They can't heal in other places. Maybe in their own house most of the time it's too much for them. So they don't have a place where they can really nourish themselves, and giving them that space where they can kind of nourish themselves. So that's most of the kind of stuff I've been doing with people with trauma. I've been doing some specific things with some specific people, depending on what we mean by trauma. There's like, little t trauma, they say kind of colloquially, and big T trauma. Big T trauma would be kind of like diagnosed PTSD, right? Or children who experience what do you call it? adverse experience, adverse childhood experiences. And one thing that we also need to understand is that it looks different for everyone. Two people kind of experience the same traumatic event and not result in actual trauma. So even if we have memories of a traumatic event, doesn't necessarily where we have trauma in the clinical sense. It has to be impacting your life in a certain way, and has to meet certain categories. If we were to call it kind of like trauma in the way that most people would think about it, like pathological trauma, it has to meet certain criteria. So then we also have to practice our discernment. Is it to that degree? And if it is, first thing you should do is find a medical professional. That's the first thing you should do. Don't try to bypass. Actually, that's one of the things that I have been working on a lot, and been advocating a lot, and have done a lot of talks about, which like providing psychoeducation on not bypassing. So in the spiritual communities, it's very popular, or very common at least, for a lot of people to come to avoid therapy or to avoid going to the doctor for very valid reasons, for taboo, stigma. Maybe the family that wouldn't allow them to go. Maybe they can't afford it. So there's other reasons there. But if you do have the means and it is possible for you, the first step is always to find professional medical help. And then the Dhamma and the monks and spirituality and religion can be there as a supporting factor. But it shouldn't be your primary factor, in the healing process. Just like if you were to have cancer or some other sickness, yes, the Dhamma and Buddhism can support you in going through this difficult time in your life, but you need to actually, talk to the doctor and get some treatment for your cancer. The Buddhism and meditation by itself is very unlikely to be enough. So these are just some of the things that I've learned over the last like 4 or 5 years working with people with trauma. And then I also did it kind of in a professional realm as a marriage family therapist on that side too. But, obviously not applying anything from here, just doing different things.
I wonder if I could ask a follow-up question on that, a little bit more specific about if someone comes to you and as a friend, and they're experiencing experiencing emotional difficulties related to trauma in one way or another, but they haven't talked to a professional, seen a doctor. How do you, as the friend, interact with that situation? In a way to kind of a little bit maybe like step by step, or how does that look in terms of helping them pivot to see a doctor or a professional?
So I think the first step is, as Bante we talked about earlier, is just providing that space where the person feels safe so they can open up, so they're receptive, so they can be receptive to anything that we have to say. And when we share things, we shouldn't share things as like things that they should need to do. They shouldn't be kind of like commands, or we shouldn't give them like ultimatums. Well, you either go or I won't help you anymore. So we have to kind of avoid those kind of situations where the person feels like, oh, this person is trying to impose their will on me, right? We can talk from a place of like compassion, like, oh, wow, it seems like, this is a very difficult situation that you're in. And, it would be in your best interest to use all available resources. And me as your friend, I'm one of them. And, I'm honored that you would come to me with this and trust me with this. But then there's also other resources, maybe your family, if you feel safe with them, maybe go to look for a therapist or talk to a psychiatrist or a doctor. So we start naming all these resources, and then be like, how can I help you? How can I connect you with those resources as a friend? So the friend is the facilitator, right?
Excellent.
That's what we're doing. We're not prescribing, we're not directing, we're there to facilitate. So how can I support you in this healing process? And then do anything you can to help them.
Awesome.
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you, Bhante.
Okay, so we have another question from our good friend Vandana Bante. How are you? Bante Varapaño. Oh, he's sharing some good resources. Yes, Flowers in the Dark is an amazing book. I've shared it with many people. Bante has actually a series. If you go to his YouTube channel, he kind of reads through it and guides people through that book. So if you're interested in that, you can go check out Bante Varapaño's YouTube channel. Thank you, Bante. And I think Moria, when he said enlightened, she meant an arhat, but I think the answer is still applicable. Then we have just some comments about chanting and things like that. And then Sud has another question here. It says, "Dear Bante, seems like unwholesome qualities make someone end up in hell. Is it because it just dulls the mind enough to create its own hell? So does this mean that Sotapanna is free from this because all the stream enter has is positive, wholesome qualities, overarching minor wholesomeness, and that unwholesome is meek, and that unwholesomeness is meek and not enough to drag them to hell? Is this an appropriate way for me to understand or think this is wrong?"
Yeah. So what is the mechanism whereby sotapannas don't fall into the lower realms, including hell, or the animal realm, or to being hungry ghosts? And I think it is. I think you're on the right track. It actually says in the suttas that when one attains the fruit of sotapanna, they gain the fourfold faith. Faith in the Buddha, faith in the Dhamma, and faith in the Sangha. That is, that the Buddha is rightly self-awakened, the Dhamma is well taught, and the Sangha is practiced well. And the fourth being faith in karma. So somewhere in the process of practicing meditation, on the Noble Eightfold Path, they gain faith in karma. And sometimes alternatively, this is stated instead of stated as the threefold faith, that's in the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. Then the fourth quality of a stream winner is that they keep the five precepts. I think this goes hand in hand, faith in karma, on the one hand, and keeping the five precepts is another way of kind of stating the same basic idea. Because they have faith in karma, they'll keep the five precepts. It's a very striking metaphor in the suttas of a baby. The Buddha is talking to someone, a monk actually, about what it's like to be a sotapanna. And he says, imagine that there's a baby on the floor, a toddler or a baby. And he's lying on his back. He reaches out his hands kind of at random, motioning. And one hand goes over and it feels the heat of a red hot coal that's fallen out of the fire on the floor there. And before the hand even touches it, because of the heat, he will instinctively draw his hand back. He says that's what it's like for a sotapanna when it comes to breaking the five precepts. They have this instinctive feeling that they shouldn't do it, that it's dangerous. Elsewhere in the suttas, it says that a sotapanna still has greed, aversion, and delusion, but they don't allow the greed or the aversion or delusion to be so strong that it brings them to their ruin. And so whereas someone, who isn't a sotapanna might become very angry, for example, and kill or harm living beings, a sotapanna wouldn't do that. Or if someone might, if someone who's not a sotapanna might become so greedy, overcome by greed or desire for something that they might steal, the sotapanna might they still feel greed sometimes, they still feel aversion sometimes, but they won't let it get so out of hand that they'll do those kinds of things. Although they still can break the five precepts. It seems that it's not to such an extent that it'd be a very serious offense that would cause them to fall into the lower realms. So it isn't something that's really like just magical or something like that. It comes back to the kilesas. They keep their kilesas under control, their defilements of the mind, that is, and they don't break the 5 precepts to an extent that they would fall into the lower realms. It goes all the way back to these really fundamental teachings of Buddhism. Well, we take the 5 precepts as being something very fundamental to Buddhism. It's actually, they're also a teaching that's very high, you know, and it's a very high teaching. That one of the reasons the Sotapanna is so wonderful, and it's so wonderful to be a Sotapanna, is that you keep the 5 precepts. And so it says in the suttas that it's the code of conduct that's beloved by noble people. So I think it's very, very inspiring teaching that way as well.
Thank you, Bhante. We have a question, another one from Amit. Bhante, thanks for the answer about balance. In the Dhananjani Sutta, Sariputta tells the Brahmin Dhananjani, and he becomes developed and reborn in the Brahma realm. How can we tell we have developed it to a high degree as well? What's the objective measure, I guess? What's the objective measure? How can we tell if we've developed our practice to the level where we can be reborn into the Brahma realm?
Well, okay, so this the Dhananjani Sutta, I don't remember what the practice is that this Brahmin is following, or how the teaching goes. Typically, beings are reborn. It seems like typically the understanding is that beings are reborn in the Brahma realm based on the practice of the 4 Brahma Viharas. So loving kindness and compassion, sympathetic joy and equanimity. For example, there's a sutta where the Buddha is recalling that in a previous life, in the distant past, he had lived as a hermit. And he devoted himself to the practice of loving kindness, the continuous practice of loving kindness for 7 years. And as a result, when he passed away, he was reborn as the great Brahma 7 times in a row. And then he had many other very fortunate rebirths afterward. And so if we talk specifically about how to be reborn in the Brahma realms, it's typically the understanding is that it's based on the Brahma Viharas. But how to know if we will actually be reborn in that state, it may be harder to say. And so what we might do is look at, other kinds of measures that we can see here and now that are relevant to our own lives in the present. Like if we're practicing loving kindness and compassion, sympathetic joy and equanimity, for example, how are we doing with managing the defilements of our mind? If we're practicing loving kindness, what kind of an effect is it having over time with relation to our experience of aversion, anger, hatred, these kinds of things? Loving kindness is the antidote to ill will, And so are we finding that our ill will is going down over time in our lives? That's one kind of measure. If we're thinking about other practices, so for example, how well are we doing at breath meditation? Well, are we finding when we practice breath meditation that we're able to stay with the breath more and more, so to the point where we're able to stay with the breath through 3 breaths, 4 breaths, 5 breaths in the present. Are we able to stay with the breath? If we're counting the breath, can we stay with 45 breaths consecutively without missing a breath, without missing a count? This would be pretty good. And then we have a feeling that our mindfulness is getting a lot better, and we should be probably would find in that case that when we get off the cushion and we go out into our daily activities, that we can be pretty mindful in our interactions with others, for example, and in the various tasks that we're doing. We'll find that this is very beneficial to us, and we may not need to think into the future, where will I be reborn? This is something that we won't be able to say so easily now. But these other measures we can see in our own lives. I wonder if you have any additional ideas, Bhante.
I think I remember that sutta. There's a man who was like sick and he's dying, and Venerable Sariputta goes and he leads them all the way to the Brahma world. Okay. That's why he's reborn there. So he's kind of like led there through this guided meditation. But then when he goes to the Buddha goes, hey, why did he just leave him at the Brahma world? Why didn't he take him all the way to Nirvana?
Right.
And he goes, well, these Brahmins, they want to be with Brahma. So I took him there. And then the Buddha's like, and you should have taken him to Nirvana. I think that's the one that's the one I recall where this is happening. So it's an interesting discourse. Okay, Mini Vishal Shah says, can Brahmas who are anagamis or non-returners be considered as kalyanamitas as much as the monastic on earth?
Is this the same person as the previous question? I'm sorry.
No, it's a different person.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we just haven't had another question about Brahmas.
Yeah.
Okay. Can Brahmas who are anagamis be considered your kalyanamitas as much as the monastics on earth? It's very interesting. Okay. I'm not quite sure. If you know any,
yeah, that's what I was going to say too. Yeah.
And you're able to interact with them and so on, and they're providing support for your practice, and I suppose so. But I've never had such a relationship myself, so I can't speak to it myself.
Yeah. I mean, any kalyanamita that you can have is a treasure, is a gem in this life. So whether they're humans or non-humans, take all the kalyanamitas you can get. That's what I would say. Here's an interesting question. Venerables, the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, right, talks of people having mental disorders like mood or anxiety that are fixed diagnoses. How does the view of these considering? Oh, I don't think it says fixed, to be fair to the DSM, right? If they were fixed, then all we could do is just like bear with it and treat the symptoms, and then the person's going to be whatever their classification is for the rest of their life, right? So I don't think they would say they're fixed. And actually, each edition, category changes, so we know they're not fixed, right? They're always constantly changing. So even the DSM can't escape anicca itself. It's also susceptible to the rules of Buddhism. But I think your question is trying to get at, like, how does Buddhism see what are classified mental disorders in the regular world? Like, what these two maps, right? There's this map of like these kind of moods and thoughts and maybe even pathologies. And then how does Buddhism see these unwholesome, right, or states of suffering? And I think I forget how many exactly they are. In the Abhidhamma, it talks about all the different dhammas or chittas, right? And then it says how many unwholesome there is and how many unwholesome there is. And fortunately enough, to what I remember is that there's more wholesome factors than there is unwholesome factors when it comes to all of these. They're like 40 something or near there factors that the mind can be divided into, mental states. And then fortunately, there's more wholesome states than there is unwholesome states. So I would say that from the Buddhist perspective, I mean, it's good, right? Like, actually, there's more wholesome states, right? More wholesome thoughts, more wholesome emotions, however you want to classify it, than there is unwholesome. And the unwholesomeness is kind of like the oddness, right? It's like when things go wrong, things lead that way. But as it says in that one verse in Anguttara Nikaya, and I think also in the Dhammapada, that the natural state of the mind is pure and luminous, but only becomes defiled due to external contaminants, the asavas, right? This is unknown to the regular person. So I think the Buddhist perspective on the mind and sattas is that, the nature, whatever, let's not take it too literally, but the foundation is wholesomeness, but it becomes unwholesome due to all these things that corrupt the individual, where we might think of, like, in the more secular world, we might say, well, all humans or all living beings are selfish because they're trying to perpetuate genes into the next generation. So it's all about sending genes into the next generation. It really doesn't care about you, right? And if the more selfish you are, or the more self-centered you are, you can live longer, right? It's better for fitness, and you can take advantage of others. So there's been like this kind of argument for many years, like the survival of the fittest, that actually our nature is to be selfish and to be mean and to be bad. And that helps us push genes into the next generation. And that's what humans are. Humans are all selfish. They had that book, The Selfish Gene, and all that kind of stuff. But actually recently, well, not too recently, a couple of years ago, the famous Tibetan monk, Matthew Ricard, he published a book called Altruism, A Case for Altruism. it's a huge book. It's like really fat. And he talks about how he debunks that whole thing where people think that humans are inherently bad or that evolution made us to be bad. He goes, actually, no, evolution made us to be cooperative, to be altruistic, to be compassionate. He's like, that's the unique thing about mammals and human beings, that we help each other. That's why we've been able to thrive. So he starts pointing out to all this evidence that actually, even, from our modern scientific understanding, our nature is to be good. And we only are not good, or we fall into pathology because things go wrong outside in the world or in the organism and things like that. So I think, things are starting to line up to show that, humans are a lot more resilient and they have more wholesome factors, and that it's not necessarily we have to think about everything in a pathological sense. Even in psychology, there's been this big emphasis on actual positive psychology, not what you see like on TikTok and stuff like that, but positive psychology, meaning the study of human flourishing, right? The wholesome states of mind. So that field has been taken off for the last 15, 20 years, where they study like people who are actually happy, people who are actually compassionate. And they're like, oh, what makes this person a very compassionate person? And studying like the regular levels of compassion in a regular person and a person who's very compassionate, right? And how can we leverage this information to make people more compassionate, more loving, more altruistic, more happy, so we can have a happier world for all of us to live in. So I know like it's not specific to what you're saying, but I kind of wanted to kind of give more context to this question that you're asking. I don't know, Bante, if you wanted to kind of nail it down or talk specifically about this question.
Sure. Maybe dovetailing a little bit with something you mentioned earlier about the change, in mental disorders. And one thing we can look at it a little bit like we do with physical disorders. It's we experience some things that are very transient. If we get the flu, for example, or something like this, but other times we get diagnosed with chronic physical health problems, and sometimes health problems that we think when we're diagnosed will last the rest of our lives. And in fact, this may happen, and we may have a chronic health problem that lasts the rest of our lives that we'll have to live with. And however, I think whether it's a mental disorder or a physical health problem, and I'm no mental health professional. I'm not educated really or trained in mental health, but it seems that some days are better than others. That there will be change over time. That it won't always be exactly the same. Furthermore, treatments change over time. It seems that some people have found dramatic relief from new psychiatric medications, for example, over the last couple of decades, and this has been very helpful to them, as well as new kind of treatment strategies. I'm thinking of the right word, but how they interact, and how they think about their mental health disorders. And when we practices in Buddhism, such as meditation and practicing generosity and so on like this, can all help us to learn how to interact with our emotions and our thoughts in ways that are more and more skillful. So that, for example, if we're experiencing anxiety, the experience of anxiety, we have different kinds of ways that we interact with anxiety and how we experience actually having anxiety. We can kind of get all caught up in it, for example, and it's the nature of the mind with relation to its emotions to identify with them and to be heavily involved with them. But we also can develop over time some mindful kind of reserve from them, so that we're not identifying with them so much. This is my anxiety and I'm anxious and so on like this. We come to understand that anxiety is something that's not us and it's not ours. And this can help us to have, at the same time we're experiencing anxiety, to not suffer as much with it and not feed into the anxiety. Just talking about anxiety, because it's one of the emotions you mentioned in the question. And so the experience of anxiety can change in terms of, in and of itself, it will change. And also we can have an effect on how we experience it, how intense it is and how long it lasts and so on like this as well. So in these ways, it still is in line with the teaching on impermanence that we find in Buddhism.
Bante, it's time.
It's time. It's 9 o'clock. Okay.
Yes. Yes. So I'd just like to thank everyone for joining us. It looks like we had a really good turnout online and a lot of interactions, and so many good questions, right? I had to think about these deeply, some of them, and, all kinds of different questions on the spectrum, which was very interesting. And Bante also giving such beautiful answers and very good answers, Bante. And
Sadhu, your answers as well.
yeah. So thank you for joining us for Monk Chat. Bante, would you like to say anything before we finish?
Well, let's see. Yes. Thanks to everyone for the great questions and anumodana your practice and thinking deeply about the Dhamma, and trying to make progress. And maybe we'll also add, we have some in-person teaching events coming up this weekend, as always. We have the regular Saturday evening a meditation and Dhamma talk from 6 to 7:30 here at Empty Cloud. And on Sunday, we have the program from 1 to 4 in the afternoon. It's quite a lively day. Many people will come before the meal and make food offerings as well, as early as 10 or 10:30. Also opportunities to volunteer even earlier than that with service work around the monastery. Anyone who wants to participate in that can come at, for example, at 9 o'clock. And so it may make a full day of it. So volunteer in the morning, food offerings, and then undertaking precepts. Also, we have a short and easy precept ceremony before getting into a meditation Dhamma talk program in the afternoon from 1 to 4. So I'd like to encourage all of you to come out for those as you like, or to tune in for the live streams coming up later in the week, starting again on Wednesday. And again, anumodana your practice, and may you all prosper in the Dhamma.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. See you soon. Bye-bye, everyone.